My name is Mark Ryland. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 17 of those years, I've been a paramedic. Not in a big city with sirens echoing off skyscrapers, but out here in the Ozark Plateau, where your response time is measured less by traffic lights and more by how many miles of gravel road you've got to chew up to get to someone. It's a different kind of work. You see people at their absolute worst, but you also see them in their homes, in the places they've lived for generations. You learn the rhythms of the land, the way the hollows hold the fog in the morning, the smell of wood smoke in the fall, the dead, heavy silence of a summer night. I thought I knew these hills. I thought the worst things you could find out here were a bad meth lab, a cornered copperhead, or a family feud that got out of hand. I've handled all three. I've delivered babies on kitchen floors and held the hands of old men as they passed in their favorite armchair. I'm a practical man. I deal in what I can see, what I can touch, what I can document on a patient care report. The world, to me, is a collection of observable facts, of symptoms and treatments, of cause and effect. I've always been that way. If you'd come to me a few years ago with a story about something you saw in the woods, something that didn't fit, I would have listened politely. I would have nodded. And in my head, I'd be running through a checklist. Bear mange, feral dog pack, sleep paralysis, hallucinogens. I wouldn't have called you a liar, but I wouldn't have believed you. Not really. I'm telling you this so you understand that I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for this stuff. I'm not wired for it. What I am is a witness, and what I saw on a rainy Tuesday in October forces me to talk about it, because keeping it locked up inside feels like its own kind of poison. I know how it's going to sound. I've played it over in my own head 1,000 times, and even I have trouble believing it sometimes. But it happened. And it changed the entire texture of my world. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened. The call came in around 2:15 a.m. Dispatch toned us out for a 78-year-old male, difficulty breathing. The address was a county road number that I knew meant trouble. It wasn't really a road so much as a suggestion of one, a dirt and gravel track that snaked about 8 miles back into national forest land. It was one of those old homestead properties that got grandfathered in, a little pocket of private land surrounded by a whole lot of nothing. My partner that night was Sarah Jenkins. She was a great medic, sharp and steady. Maybe 5 years on the job to my 17. We had a good rhythm. We didn't need to talk much during a call. We just knew what the other was going to do. The rain wasn't a downpour, just a miserable, persistent drizzle that slicked the roads and clung to everything. The kind of wet that seeps into your bones. We loaded up and pulled out of the bay, the wipers slapping a hypnotic rhythm against the windshield. For the first 10 minutes, it was just another call. We drove through the sleeping town, past the closed-down gas station and the blinking yellow light at the main intersection. Then we turned off the state highway onto the paved county road, and from there, it was another 15 minutes until we hit the turnoff for the gravel. That's where the world starts to change. The pavement ends, and so does cell service. The ambulance, a big Ford chassis box, handled the bumps and ruts okay, but you had to take it slow. The headlights cut a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating a world of wet leaves, slick black branches, and the occasional pair of green eyes reflecting back from the brush before vanishing. The woods out here are thick. It's mostly oak and hickory, dense and overgrown. At night, in the rain, it feels like the trees are leaning in, trying to swallow the road. We were maybe 4 miles down this track when the first thing felt off. It wasn't one big thing, just a collection of little details. The radio, which usually crackled with static this far out, went completely dead. Not a hiss, not a pop, just a flat, unnerving silence. I tapped the unit. Dispatch, Medic 3, radio check. Nothing. Sarah glanced over. She said, "Probably the storm. These hills play hell with the signal." I agreed, but it felt different. It felt like the silence was coming from outside, not from the equipment. Then, the animals, or the lack of them. Normally on a drive like this, you're dodging deer, raccoons, possums. You hear the chorus of frogs and insects, a constant thrum of life. But that night, there was nothing. No eyes glowing in the ditch, no bugs splattering against the windshield. The world outside the cab was utterly, profoundly silent, except for the rain and the crunch of our tires on the gravel. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you. The woods weren't just quiet, they were holding their breath. I didn't say anything to Sarah about it. What would I say? "Hey, it's too quiet out here." She'd think I was losing it. So I just kept driving, my hands tight on the wheel. But I could feel the hair on my arms starting to prickle. It's an old animal instinct, that feeling. The one that tells you a predator is nearby. Every first responder has it to some degree. It's what makes you pause at a doorway or scan the faces in a crowd. My instinct was screaming at me, but my rational brain was telling it to shut up. It's the woods. It's the dark. It's the rain. You're just spooked. We rounded a sharp bend, and the headlights swept across something in the road. I hit the brakes, the ambulance groaning and sliding a bit on the wet gravel. It was a deer, a big doe. But it wasn't standing there, frozen in the lights. It was lying in a heap, twisted at an angle that was fundamentally wrong. "Damn," Sarah breathed, leaning forward. "Somebody must have clipped it." I put the rig in park and turned on the floods. The scene lit up in stark, white light. It wasn't clipped by a car. The animal was torn open from its brisket to its belly. But it wasn't the work of coyotes or a mountain lion. I've seen what they do. They're efficient. They go for the soft parts, the guts. This was different. This was rageful. The doe's neck was broken, snapped clean around at a grotesque angle. One of its legs was ripped entirely from the socket, lying a few feet away in the weeds. The wounds were jagged, torn, not cut. It looked like two giant hands had just ripped it apart. And there wasn't a lot of blood, which was the strangest part. It was like whatever did it had been neat about it, in a horrifying way. I remember thinking, a bear. Had to be a bear. A really big, really angry bear. But even that didn't sit right. A bear would have fed. It would have dragged the carcass off the road. This was just left. A statement. I got out of the cab, against my better judgment. The air was thick with the smell of rain, wet earth, and something else. A coppery, musky scent. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse, but wilder, gamier. It clung to the back of my throat. I took a few steps closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. The silence was even more profound out here. It was a dead space. I looked into the woods on either side of the road. The darkness was absolute, a solid wall of black just beyond the reach of our lights. And I had the undeniable, gut-wrenching feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't a guess. It was a certainty. I felt a pressure in the air, the way you feel before a lightning strike. I backed away slowly and got back in the ambulance, closing the door with a heavy thud. "We gotta go around," I said. My voice was a little shaky. Sarah was just staring at the doe, her face pale in the dashboard lights. She whispered, "Mark, what the hell does that to a deer?" I didn't have an answer. "A bear," I said. but the word felt hollow and stupid as soon as I said it. I put the rig in drive and carefully maneuvered around the carcass, one tire dipping into the muddy ditch. As we passed it, my headlights caught one of the doe's eyes, still open, staring blankly at the rainy sky. It's a picture that's been burned into my memory. We drove the next 4 miles in total silence. The unease in the cab had solidified into a cold, hard knot of dread. We were no longer on a medical call. We were driving into something else. The GPS told us we were there, but all we saw was a narrow, overgrown lane that peeled off the main track. A rusty, leaning mailbox had the right numbers painted on it. I turned the ambulance down the lane, low-hanging branches scraping and screeching along the roof and sides of the box. It was another 100 yards of this before the lane opened into a small, muddy clearing. In the center sat a single-wide trailer, old and weather-beaten, the kind with the pale green metal siding that's gone chalky with age. A single bare bulb on a pole cast a weak yellow circle of light over a yard full of weeds and junk. No other lights were on in the trailer. No car in sight, just an ancient, rust-eaten Ford tractor sinking into the mud. I put the rig in park and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the drumming of rain on the roof. "Doesn't look good," Sarah said, already pulling on her gloves. "Maybe he's in the back," I offered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We followed procedure. I grabbed the jump bag and the cardiac monitor. Sarah took the airway bag. We got out, our boots sinking into the cold mud. The air still had that wet dog, coppery smell, even stronger here. It was almost gag-inducing. We walked up to the trailer's small wooden porch. The steps groaned under our weight. The front door was a cheap, flimsy thing, and it was slightly ajar. The frame around the lock was splintered, the wood shattered and broken. Someone had forced their way in. Or something. "Sheriff's Department first," Sarah said, her voice low. "Protocol. Scene safety. If a scene isn't safe, you don't go in. You stage a safe distance away and wait for law enforcement. That's the rule." But the call was for difficulty breathing. If our patient was in there, dying, while we waited 20 minutes for a deputy to navigate that road, you make a choice. It's a judgment call you have to make a dozen times a shift. "Let's be quick," I said. "Announce ourselves, quick assessment. If anything feels wrong, we're out." I pushed the door open. "Paramedics," I called out. "County EMS. Sir, are you okay?" The only answer was the sound of rain on the metal roof. The inside of the trailer was dark and smelled of stale cigarette smoke, old food, and something else. That same metallic, gamey odor from the road. It was thick in here. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The place was a mess, but it looked like the mess of a lonely old man, not a struggle. Piles of newspapers, dirty dishes, clothes slung over furniture. The beam found him in a recliner in the small living room, facing a small, static-filled television. He was an old man, thin and frail, wearing a flannel shirt. His head was slumped to one side, his eyes open and vacant. It was obvious he was gone. He'd been gone for a while. I did a quick check, just to be sure. No pulse, no respiration. I looked for the cause of death. The dispatch was for breathing problems, but this wasn't that. On his chest and neck were deep, parallel gouges, 4 of them, that had torn through his shirt and into the skin beneath. They were dark with dried blood. His hands were clenched, his face frozen in an expression of absolute, abject terror. He had died looking at whatever had come through his door. That's when my brain finally caught up with my instincts. The deer, the door, the smell, the look on this man's face. This wasn't a medical call, and it wasn't a crime scene I was trained for. Sarah was already backing toward the door. "Mark, we need to leave. Now." She was right. We had a duty to report, but our safety came first. I started to back out, my light still on the dead man. And that's when I heard it. A low sound from outside, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor of the trailer. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a dog. It was something in between, and it was close. We froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. It's the strangest feeling, that kind of fear. Time seems to stretch and warp. A second feels like a minute. Every sound is magnified. The rain on the roof sounded like hammers. My own breathing was a roar in my ears. The growl came again, this time from the other side of the trailer, near the single window in the living room. Sarah and I looked at each other, our eyes wide in the dim light. We were trapped. The only way out was the door we came in, and whatever was out there was circling us. My brain was trying to rationalize it. A big dog, a feral hog, a mountain lion. But none of them fit the sound. The sound had a resonance, a chesty depth that spoke of immense size. Then, a scratching sound at the window. The thin glass rattled in its frame. A dark shape blotted out the weak light from the pole outside. It was huge. I couldn't make out details, just a massive, dark silhouette. It was there for a second, then it was gone. "The back door," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with panic. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We moved as quietly as we could through the cluttered trailer, my flashlight beam bouncing nervously ahead of us. We passed through a small kitchen and found the back door. It was a solid wood door, but the knob wouldn't turn. Locked. A deadbolt. The key was probably on a hook somewhere, or in the old man's pocket. We didn't have time for that. We were cornered. A loud crash came from the front of the trailer. It sounded like the porch steps splintering. It was on the porch. It was coming in. There was no more time for stealth. "Go! Go now!" I yelled, shoving Sarah toward the front. We ran back through the living room. The front door, which we'd left open, was now blocked by a towering figure silhouetted against the yellow porch light. This is the part that's hardest to explain. The part my own mind still tries to reject. It wasn't a man, and it wasn't an animal. It was both, and it was wrong. It stood on two legs, but they were bent backward like a dog's, with long, pronounced hocks. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Its shoulders were immense, broad and powerful like a gorilla's, covered in coarse, matted hair that was somewhere between black and dark gray. The arms were long, too long for the body, and ended in hands that were a terrifying hybrid of a man's hand and a wolf's paw, tipped with thick, yellowed claws. But the head was the worst part. It was the head of a massive canine, a wolf or a shepherd, but bigger and more monstrous than anything I'd ever seen. The snout was long, lined with yellow teeth that were bared in a silent snarl. And the eyes glowed with a faint, reflected light, a sickening yellow-green. But they weren't the dumb, vacant eyes of an animal. They were intelligent. They were looking at us, assessing us. There was a mind behind those eyes, and it was full of ancient, predatory hatred. The smell that washed over us was overwhelming. It was the smell of wet fur, rotting meat, and something else, something acrid and foul, like a chemical spill. My brain just short-circuited. It was trying to find a box to put this thing in. Man in a suit? No. Animatronic? No. It was real. It was breathing. I could see the condensation of its breath in the cold night air. It took a step into the trailer, ducking its head to clear the doorframe. The floorboards groaned under its weight. We were trapped. The recliner with a dead man was between us. Sarah let out a small, choked gasp. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Its ears, pointed and alert, swiveled to pinpoint her. In that moment, the freeze broke. The survival instinct kicked in, overriding everything else. There was no plan. There was only escape. "Run!" I screamed, a raw primal sound ripped from my throat. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from a side table, the first thing my hand found, and hurled it at the creature's head. It was a pathetic gesture, but it was all I had. The ashtray bounced off its shoulder with a dull thud. The thing barely flinched, but it did turn its attention to me for a split second. That was all Sarah needed. She bolted past it, through the open doorway, and off the porch. I was right behind her. I didn't look back. I just ran. My feet hit the wooden porch, and I vaulted over the railing instead of taking the stairs, landing hard in the mud below. The impact sent a shockwave up my leg, but I didn't stop. The ambulance was 30 feet away. It might as well have been a mile. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and blinding. The mud sucked at my boots, trying to pull me down. I could hear it behind me. I could hear its heavy footfalls, a sickening wet thud in the mud. I could hear its breathing, a low, rasping pant that was impossibly close. Sarah was ahead of me. She reached the passenger side of the ambulance and fumbled with the handle. The doors were locked. We always lock the doors, even on a scene. It's automatic, a habit born from working in rough areas, a habit that was about to get us killed. "Mark, the keys!" she screamed, her voice shrill with terror. I was still fumbling for them in my pocket as I ran. My fingers were numb and clumsy. The creature was closing the distance. It was faster than it had any right to be, covering the ground in huge, loping strides. I saw it out of the corner of my eye as it lunged, not at me, but at Sarah. It swiped at her with one of its massive, clawed hands. The sound was sickening, a wet tear as the claws raked across her back. She screamed, a sound of pure agony, and went down in the mud. It stood over her, its head lowered, and for a horrible second, I thought it was going to tear her throat out. But it looked up, its glowing eyes fixing on me. It was toying with us. It was a cat with 2 mice. That image of Sarah on the ground and that thing standing over her finally broke through my fear and hit something else. Rage. She was my partner. I wasn't leaving her. I finally got the keys in my hand and hit the unlock button. The truck chirped. I didn't run for the driver's side. I ran straight at the monster. I didn't have a plan. I just screamed, a meaningless, furious sound, and charged forward. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. The creature seemed surprised. It took a half step back, its head cocked. That gave me the opening I needed. I didn't attack it. I grabbed Sarah under her arms and dragged her, limp and sobbing, the last few feet to the passenger door. I heaved her inside, onto the seat, and slammed the door shut. The creature was on me in an instant. It slammed its body against the side of the ambulance, rocking the whole vehicle on its suspension. I scrambled around the front of the hood, my hands slipping on the wet metal. I could hear its claws screeching against the passenger door, trying to find a purchase. I got to the driver's side, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. I slammed the door and hit the lock button, just as a heavy, dark shape filled the window. A clawed hand slammed against the glass, not breaking it, but sending spiderweb cracks through the safety glass. The face was right there, inches from mine, separated by a thin layer of glass. The yellow eyes burned into me, full of a terrifying, hateful intelligence. Its lips were peeled back from its teeth, and a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the entire cab. I jammed the key in the ignition and twisted. The diesel engine roared to life. The creature recoiled from the noise and the sudden flash of the headlights coming to full power. It took a step back, giving me the space I needed. I threw the ambulance into reverse, not even looking. I stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun in the mud, then caught. We shot backward, crashing through a row of overgrown bushes. I cranked the wheel, swinging the front end of the rig around, and slammed it into drive. The creature was standing in the middle of the clearing, watching us. It wasn't running. It was just standing there, as if it knew we couldn't really escape. I aimed the ambulance straight for the narrow lane we'd come in on, and floored it. We fishtailed wildly, the back end of the box swinging out and clipping the corner of the trailer with a deafening shriek of tearing metal. I didn't slow down. Branches scraped and screeched along the sides. A low-hanging limb smashed against the windshield, adding a new spiderweb of cracks to the ones already there. "Is it following?" I yelled at Sarah. She was slumped against the passenger door, holding her back, her face a mask of pain and shock. She tried to look in the side mirror. "I can't see. Oh God, Mark, yes, it's in the trees." I risked a glance in my own mirror. I couldn't see it, but I could see the trees and bushes along the edge of the lane shaking violently, as if a huge animal was crashing through them, easily keeping pace with us. It was running parallel to the road, pacing us. The sound of its progress was a constant, terrifying crashing just beyond the reach of our headlights. That 8-mile road felt like 100. Every turn threatened to send us sliding into a ditch. Every bump felt like the suspension was going to break. The whole time, the crashing in the woods kept pace. It never fell behind. It was a relentless, terrifying pursuit. I was just waiting for it to burst out of the trees in front of us, to force us to a stop. But it never did. It just stayed there, in the dark, a phantom presence running alongside us. Finally, I saw the blessed sight of moonlight reflecting off wet pavement. We hit the paved county road, the tires humming on the solid surface. I didn't slow down. I pushed the ambulance to 70, then 80, flying down the winding country road far faster than was safe. I didn't care. I just wanted distance. I looked in the mirror again. The crashing sounds had stopped. The woods were just woods again. We were alone. I drove for another 5 miles before I finally eased my foot off the accelerator. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the steering wheel. My whole body was drenched in a cold sweat. Sarah was moaning softly in the passenger seat. "We gotta stop," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to look at your back." I found a pull-off, a small gravel patch by an old church, and brought the rig to a stop. I left the engine running, the headlights on. I didn't want to be in the dark. I went around and helped her out of the passenger seat and into the patient compartment in the back. The whole time, I kept scanning the tree line, my heart pounding in my chest. I half expected to see those yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. In the bright, sterile light of the box, I could see the damage. The creature's claws had torn through her jacket and uniform shirt like they were paper. 4 deep, parallel gouges ran from her right shoulder blade down to her lower back. They were bleeding heavily, the flesh ragged and torn. It was bad. It needed stitches, a lot of them, and a serious course of antibiotics. As a medic, my training took over. It was a relief to have something to do, something I understood. I cleaned the wounds as best I could, applied pressure dressings, and started an IV. She was going into shock, her skin cool and clammy, her pulse thready. All the while, We didn't really talk about what had happened. We couldn't. The words didn't exist. How do you start that conversation? Once I had her stabilized, I got on the radio. We were back in range now. I didn't call our dispatch. I called the sheriff's department directly. I kept my voice as level as I could. Sheriff's dispatch, this is Medic 3. We need to meet a deputy at the highway intersection. My partner's been injured. We were attacked on scene. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She got my location and said a unit was on its way. The 20 minutes we waited for the deputy felt longer than the entire chase. We just sat there in the back of the ambulance, the doors locked, listening to the rain. Finally, a pair of headlights pulled in behind us. It was Deputy Miller, a guy I knew pretty well. He was a good cop, a no-nonsense local guy. He walked up to the side door, his hand on his weapon, his face etched with concern. I opened the door. "Mark, what the hell happened?" he asked, his eyes going wide when he saw Sarah on the gurney. I gave him the short version. We found the patient deceased, obvious trauma. We were attacked by an animal. A very large, very aggressive animal. I left out the part about it walking on 2 legs. I left out the canine head and the intelligent eyes. I knew how it would sound. I just said it was a bear, a massive, abnormal bear. He listened, nodding slowly. He looked at Sarah's back. "Jesus," he muttered. "That's no bear I've ever seen." He called for another ambulance to transport Sarah to the hospital, and then he and his partner followed me back to our station to take a full statement. They looked at the damage to the ambulance, the cracked windows, the deep scratches and dents along the side, the corner of the box that was peeled back like a sardine can. They wrote it all down. They were professional, sympathetic even, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. The official report, I later learned, listed the death of the old man as animal attack, suspected black bear. Sarah's injuries were listed the same way. The game warden set out some traps, but they never caught anything. After a week, the story faded from the local news. It became just another unfortunate but explainable tragedy in the deep woods. Sarah and I knew better. We never worked a shift together again. She recovered physically, but the nerve damage in her back was permanent. She took a desk job with the service. We tried to talk about it once, a few weeks later, over coffee. We couldn't. We just sat there in silence, the shared memory a heavy, impassable wall between us. The thing we saw was too big, too impossible for words. There was no box to put it in, and no comfort to be found. I quit that job about 6 months later. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't drive those dark roads at night. Every time we passed a stretch of woods, I felt a knot of cold dread in my stomach. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. The world had been a safe, understandable place to me before that night. It was governed by rules, by physics, by biology. That thing, whatever it was, broke all the rules. It showed me that the map of the world I had in my head was incomplete. There were blank spots, places marked, "Here be monsters," and I had stumbled right into one of them. I took a job as a paramedic in a suburban area a few hours away. There are no deep woods here, just manicured lawns and street lights. It's boring, and I'm grateful for it every single day. But the fear never really leaves. It's a low-grade hum in the back of my mind. I don't sleep well. I have nightmares of yellow eyes and the smell of wet fur. I can't be in the woods, not even for a picnic in a state park. The feeling of the trees closing in is too much. I've done the research, of course. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I go online. I've read the stories, the eyewitness accounts. They call it Dogman. The descriptions are always eerily similar. The height, The canine legs, the humanoid torso, the intelligent eyes. Hundreds of reports from all over the country, all dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. I used to be one of the scoffers. Now I'm one of the witnesses. I know what's out there. Or at least, I know that something is out there that doesn't fit our understanding of the world. It's easy to be a skeptic when you're safe in your well-lit home. It's easy to dismiss these stories when the world is orderly and makes sense. But when you're standing in the mud, in the rain, 30 feet from safety, and a 7-foot-tall wolf that walks like a man is standing over your partner, skepticism is a luxury you can't afford. It's a flimsy shield that shatters the moment you see the impossible standing right in front of you. That night changed my entire perception of reality. It taught me that we live on a very small, well-lit island of knowledge in the middle of a vast, dark ocean of the unknown. And sometimes, things wash ashore. I'm telling this story not for attention, and not because I expect anyone to believe me. I know most of you won't. You'll come up with your own explanations. A bear with mange, a man in a costume, a shared hallucination brought on by stress. I would have done the same thing before it happened to me. I'm telling it because I have to. Because it's a truth that I carry every day, and it's too heavy to carry alone. And maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has seen it too. Someone who felt the same soul-crushing terror and the same frustrating inability to make anyone understand. Maybe this will help them feel a little less crazy, a little less alone. My advice to you is simple. If you're ever out on a back road, late at night, and the woods go silent, turn around. If your instincts are screaming at you that something is wrong, listen to them. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to be rational. Just leave. Because there are things in the deep, dark corners of this world that we are not meant to understand, and we are certainly not equipped to confront. We are not at the top of the food chain everywhere we go. That is a dangerous assumption. The thing that haunts me the most, the image that replays in my mind over and over, isn't the claws or the teeth. It's the eyes. It's the moment it stood over me, looking through the glass of the driver's side window. The intelligence I saw there wasn't just animal cunning. It was ancient. It was aware. And what I saw in those eyes was not just hunger. It was contempt. It was looking at me the way you might look at an insect. We were a nuisance, an interruption. We were trespassing in its world, and it was simply, calmly, removing us. I don't know what it was, where it came from, or what it wanted, and I suppose I never will. I just know that it's real, and it's still out there, in the dark, walking through the woods on legs that bend the wrong way. And I am grateful for every mile of concrete and every street light between us.